How many of you are currently running a business or founding a startup? Oh gosh, amazing. How many of you are currently thinking about founding a startup? And how many of you have absolutely no interest in startups and just here for the free beer? One? Great, there is always one, isn't there? Always one.
Okay, that's a friend of mine. Now, actually, an ex-colleague from Orange. He came all the way from Brussels, right? There you go. So he is justified. Now, Alice, before you talk about entrepreneurs and entrepreneur first, where did you start? What did your parents do for a living?
So I was brought up in the New Forest on the south coast of England and came from a family that had absolutely no interest in business at all. So my mum and her family for generations had been doctors, and my dad and his family for generations had been in the military. So it was not a commercially minded household.
Okay, and I assume you studied business?
I did, yes. I don't know if it was a totally useful thing to study, but I did study business.
And somehow we ended up at McKinsey.
Yeah, I mean, when I was graduating, I wanted to try and do the most ambitious thing that I could. And I found out about McKinsey in my first year at university and thought, right, I'm going to do that. I'm going to try and tick as many boxes to get there. And I think it's partly why we started EF is how do you help people who are hugely ambitious, want to do something really impactful with their lives? How do you make sure that founding a startup is not just on their radar, is not just seen as the most aspirational thing they can do with their lives, but is also possible? And so EF was designed to solve many of the problems that meant that people like me, and I expect many people in the room, felt that they had to go into careers rather than founding a startup.
Yeah. And what have you learned at McKinsey that made you a more suitable person for helping other founders?
I mean, the amazing thing about McKinsey is the exposure that you get to so many different businesses and how many different businesses work in different industries. They're also really, really good at helping you perfect your comms and how you communicate in a very structured way using the pyramid principle. And I think those two things were really, really useful, both in the early days of EF, but also just as general life skills. And actually a lot of the stuff that we learned around pyramid principle and how to communicate in a very structured top-down way, we still use with our founders today.
And you met Matt at McKinsey?
Yeah, Matt and I met on our first day.
On the first day? Wow.
Yeah.
So you've been knowing each other for a while?
Almost 9 years.
And how did the idea come together of starting something else, of McKinsey?
So Matt and McKinsey used to have this policy where after 2 years you had to leave and either go and do an MBA or you could do an internship or go and work at a company. And so pretty much from the minute you joined, people were saying, like, what are you going to do when you leave? What are you going to do when you leave? And Matt and I would often have lunch together and we'd start talking about ideas, and we decided that we should start a startup together. And we went through a very sort of management consultant process of trying to come up with a startup idea. And we came up with this idea that in hindsight was probably not a great one. And then we did the consultant thing of we built the model and we modeled how much money we were going to make and we modeled how much it was going to cost. And we're like, shit, it's not going to work. We can't build this startup. And so we stopped. And fortunately, it was at the time where McKinsey was doing some work on Tech City and how do you turn Old Street into Silicon Roundabout and all the
Building clusters, yeah.
Sorry?
Building the cluster.
Yeah, building the cluster here, which has worked really well. And this is back in 2011. And one of the recommendations from their report was how do you get graduates into entrepreneurship? How do you make entrepreneurship something that is aspirational? And I suppose that was the kind of the first nugget of an idea that led to Matt and I saying, actually, that's something that we can do and would be interesting to do. And that was kind of where EF started, although it's very different to where EF is now, 6 years later.
So before we jump into EF, there are some other interesting initiatives you are working on, you're involved with. One of them is Girls Code First.
Code First Girls.
Code First Girls. Yeah. What is that?
So in the early days of EF, we had one of the problems that I think a lot of people working in tech experience, which is we were really struggling to get technical women to apply to the program. And we saw a gender ratio of about 20% of applicants were women and about 20% of the people on the program were women. And obviously being a woman, I was like, well, this is crazy. I can fix this. 6 years later, it's a lot harder to fix than I initially thought it was back in 2011. But one of the things that we did to fix it was, I think there's a ton of really amazing initiatives around women in tech. But I think one of the missing pieces is how do you upskill women so that they have the technical skills that they need and so that they feel comfortable working in tech startups and working with technology. And so we started this sort of idea of, okay, well, let's go to universities and teach women to code for free while they're at university and try and get them excited about startups. And that turned into where it is now, 5 years later, where we've taught, by the end of this year, we'll have taught 5,000 women how to code.
That's amazing.
For free across 27 different universities in the UK. And we're seeing an amazing conversion from experimenting with code at university and trying bits of code to then either working in tech, particularly in tech startups, or going on to take further education and becoming a junior software developer.
Yeah, interesting.
So I love that organization. It's amazing.
Congratulations. You also interned in the office of Tony Blair.
Yes.
How did that come together?
So I was working in London in something else, in another internship, and the
After McKinsey?
Before McKinsey.
Before McKinsey.
And the opportunity to work with Tony Blair just after he left office came up. And so I did that for, 5 months?
Mm-hmm. Okay, and the last thing I want to ask you about is Founders for Schools. We know that Sherry Cotu, she's the amazing investor, and she's been voted by Wired magazine the best CEO mentor in Europe. She started this, and you are on the board, on the advisory board?
So I'm on the advisory board. I mean, I can take absolutely no credit for the amazing work that they are doing. But this is this idea that if you can get amazing founders to go into schools and speak about entrepreneurship, you can get people at a very early age considering founding as a potential career path. And if you look at the stats behind Founders for School, the conversion of schools that have a founder come in and talk about startups and particularly talk about tech, the conversion of kids going into STEM GCSEs and STEM A-levels is like through the roof.
Wow, that's amazing.
Cool.
Who can apply for that as a mentor?
I think if you've founded a company that's growing, that's over a certain size and growing at a certain rate, you can apply to speak. Okay, but if you check on the website, you can find all the details.
Yeah, check it out if you're interested. Now, Entrepreneur First, you came together with Matt. Mm-hmm. And what was the first version of the Entrepreneur First?
First version of Entrepreneur First was pretty crappy. And if you ask EF Cohort 1, they might agree with that. I mean, we knew that there was this problem, so we went to a bunch of universities in our first 6 months, and we said to people, why aren't you starting startups? What are the issues? And these two problems came up the whole time, and one was, I really want to start a startup, but I don't have a co-founder, and I don't know where to find a co-founder. No one else wants to found a startup, so what do I do? And then the other one was, I do want to start a startup, but I just don't have an idea. I don't know what I should work on, and I don't know what a good idea looks like. And so the original version of EF was us very naively being like, oh, great, cool, okay, well, we'll just solve those problems. We'll just build teams, and we'll help people come up with ideas. And in reality, it took us about 3 years to really work out how to build teams effectively and how to help people develop ideas. But it was just something that had never been done before. And when we started off, so in 2011, the status quo, and has been for a long time, was you can't get access to funding, you can't get access to support, you can't get access to anything unless you're in a team with an idea. So it means that and that team is probably somebody that you met in kindergarten, and you've known them for 20 years, and you're kind of blood brothers or blood sisters or whatever. But that does mean that there's a bunch of barriers in place that make it very, very hard for people to start startups, unless you're in Silicon Valley where everyone else wants to start a startup. So part of EF was saying, how can we remove the cultural barriers to starting a startup? So how can we make it something that is aspirational, which now seems crazy, but in 2011 was a slightly more kooky idea. And then how can you remove the structural barriers? So how can you make it so that the most ambitious, the most talented individuals can find co-founders who are as talented, as ambitious as they are, and they have a process to quickly and easily get into teams and develop ideas that could be valuable.
Okay. Are there any people in the audience interested in or considering applying to something like Entrepreneur First? Raise your hand if you're here. A few, we have a few.
Do it, it's amazing. We now know what we're doing.
How do you interview people? What's the process and what are you looking for?
How do we interview people? So interviewing is one of the most important things we do, and I was just saying beforehand, I've interviewed more than 1,000 people over the last 6.5 years, and so we have a really clear idea of who we're looking for. we've worked with 550 founders now, and the majority of people we work with are technical, so about 80% of the people we work with come from a computer science or engineering background. And so there are some really kind of basic things that we're looking for. Our basic 4 criteria, and then there are some slightly weirder things. We like smart people. It really helps if you can learn really, really fast and you can problem solve really quickly. We like skilled people, so you do need to have some sort of skill or expertise that you can bring to the table. So either a technical skill or it might be expertise in a certain industry. You need to be committed to do this. And I think one of the amazing shifts is that now founding a startup is incredibly popular, but one of the challenges of that is that I think people often don't realize how unbelievably hard it is and how it will take over your life. So you need to be committed to that. And then the final piece is around being insightful, being contrarian. Are you the kind of people who can come up with points of view, insight that others can't? Are you looking at your job or academia or whatever you're currently doing and thinking, actually, you know, this needs to change or this could be different or there's this missed opportunity? So those are our kind of 4, but what we also often find are the kind of crazy ambitious megalomaniacs who are super competitive, but who also have the humility to have a growth mindset. And I don't know if people have read the Carol Dweck book on growth mindset, but it's one of my, oops, I've pulled my earring out. Too many hand gestures. It's one of my favorite books about how you think about learning and how you think about your personal development. And we find that founders who have a strong growth mindset, who come to EF maybe with a certain skill set, so say a very technical skill set, but come in and say, actually, I can learn to be an incredible founder, and I can learn how to do the things that I previously perceived myself to be bad at. They do really, really well. So we find the founders who are committed to self-improvement do really well.
How do you find it out in those 15 minutes interviews?
So our interviews are half an hour.
Half an hour, okay.
And we have some pretty good questions, I think. So yeah, I mean, we have an application form and then we have a half an hour interview, but we have just seen so many people over the last 6 years.
There's a committee who interviews, or it's you alone, or who's doing that?
Matt and I still do interviews every week. Yeah. It's definitely one of the most important things we do, and then other senior leaders in the company do interviews as well. Yeah.
So you mentioned that the application deadline already closed.
It did.
But you might be willing to do an exception to somebody if they want to come to you sometime soon?
If you apply now and say that you're at Startup Grind, I will make sure that the team has a look.
Thank you so much. Now, when you're interviewing those guys, what are some warning signs of people you don't want?
Warning signs. I think you often get told as an entrepreneur that you need to be really resolute, potentially quite stubborn about your ideas, and that people think your ideas are crazy, so you just need to batter down that wall. And at interview, we don't judge people on their ideas, but we do want to talk through ideas so that we understand how people think and how people kind of critically assess what they're doing. It's really, really hard to work with someone if they are being stubbornly attached to an idea rather than being reflectively attached to an idea. All ideas are terrible when they start out. All ideas are hugely flawed. But the way that to get through that is, instead of saying, you're wrong, of course it's not flawed, it's to say, actually, that's really interesting, I can see that flaw, but this is how I think I can fix it, and this is why I think I can fix it in a different way to everyone else. So you should believe in what you're doing if you have an idea, but also if you don't have an idea, that's fine. But it's more, can you critically think around what you're doing, and can you be open-minded to feedback and see that as a way to improve and augment your idea, rather than as a kind of challenge to your ego.
Yeah. So when you're hiring people, are you looking for particular people in terms of diversity, or you just
in the cohort?
Anybody? Yes, in the cohort.
So the kind of people that we're looking for are typically from technical backgrounds. Mm-hmm. We have a very, very broad set of nationalities. So only about 25% of the people that we work with in London are actually from the UK. Mm-hmm. The majority of people we work with are from the EU or rest of the world. And we're basically just looking for incredibly talented, very ambitious individuals who want to do something different and see entrepreneurship as kind of the most fundamental way for them to make impact with their lives. Yeah.
And how many have gone through your program?
So we've had 550 people across London and Singapore.
So looking back now, what are the differences which set apart the A+ players from the B players? Looking back.
I think, well, a couple of things, as it always is. idea really isn't what sets people apart. Good people, or the best founders, make their crappy ideas into amazing and insightful ideas. The B+ founders don't seem to have that same ability. And I think there's a couple of pieces that feed into that. One part of it is growth mindset, so you're not afraid to be very vulnerable and totally learn from scratch. The other piece is, and Reid Hoffman, who's one of our investors, we did an event with last week, and he was talking about how some of the best founders are those who are obsessive about business models. And I think that's actually something that doesn't get talked about a huge amount, is that it's not just enough to innovate on the technology and the product, but actually that has to be backed up by business model innovation. And a lot of the best companies not only innovate on their product and the market and all the rest of it, but they have an unusual and different approach to making money. And I think you have to be interested in the commercial side of running a business.
Yeah. So you mentioned Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn. He is your shareholder, right?
Yeah, so he led an investment round at the end of last year into the company itself. So we're a slightly unusual vehicle in that we operate like a startup. So we have 70 people across London and Singapore. And we have a very operationally intense process, but we make money like a VC. So we have funds that we deploy.
So how do you get somebody like the founder of LinkedIn, who just sold LinkedIn for, I don't know, almost 20 billion to Microsoft, to invest in your company? What's the process?
So we were very focused.
You interview him and Mark Zuckerberg and some other people, and then you chose?
So we knew we wanted to raise a round of money into the company to allow us to scale. So EF is a really unique model, but it is also something that can be applied anywhere in the world. So amazing talent doesn't just exist in Silicon Valley. Amazing founder talent exists all over the world, but we just need to unlock it. You can create a company anywhere. There are challenges scaling companies outside of Silicon Valley, but you can definitely create a company anywhere. And so we knew we wanted to raise a round that would allow us to access the world's best talent wherever they were. So accessing talent, the money, we could have got the money from anywhere, but I think it then goes to the second part around scaling, and actually the quantity of capital and the quality of the capital in Silicon Valley really does give companies that have access to Silicon Valley an edge, particularly in terms of the expertise of the investors there. So we were very keen to work with Silicon Valley investors, and as with everything in startups, through our network, we managed to get multiple different introductions to Reid, and we had multiple different people endorse us, so that actually by the time that we walked through the door and met Reid for the first time, he was already very positive.
Nice.
So much of this is about network, and raising money is about network and relationships. And my co-founder Matt focuses on fundraising both for EF and for our funds. And he is absolutely exceptional at just going out and building relationships that at the time you're like, well, that's a bit random. But it's so often that 3 years later, 4 years later, you see those relationships turn into really useful opportunities or into finance.
Yeah. Did he or any of your other investors give you some insights in terms of business model improvement of your model?
I mean, we're a reasonably established company now, so I think they're more interested in just making us do more of it rather than
scaling,
changing it necessarily.
Okay. Yeah. Let's talk about the business model, because it evolved, you said. What is it now? What happens when somebody enters the program?
So just a bit of background on the business model. We started off as a social enterprise. So we started off as a not-for-profit community interest company, which was partly because everyone we spoke to in the ecosystem was like, this is crazy, this idea will not work. There's absolutely no way that you can do this as a for-profit enterprise. And then 3 years later, after we'd proven that it worked, and we were beginning to want to scale a bit, we suddenly realized that a not-for-profit business model, which was based on corporate sponsorship, just didn't scale. We maybe could do 10 companies a year in perpetuity, but there was no way that we would actually be able to scale what we were doing. So our business model now is based on raising funds and investing funds in companies. So as a startup, it's reasonably hard to run because our revenue is so delayed. So we invest in a company. When that company exits in 5-10 years' time, we make a portion of money back from that. But it does mean that our revenue cycles are very, very long. Yeah. So it is a slightly unusual model, but we've managed to make it work.
It's a modified fund.
Yeah.
VC fund, yeah. Okay, now you're saying that you interview those founders, they come in, and then you try to build teams out of them, right?
Yeah, so the key thing about what we do that's very different from other accelerators or early stage VCs is we genuinely do invest in individuals, and you don't need an idea and you don't need a team. We invest based on your talent. But one of the kind of structural issues was if you don't have a company, you can't invest in someone. So you can't take equity in a person, which is probably a good thing. But what that means is that there's never been any way, or it's been very hard for access money that would allow them to have the time and space to find a co-founder and come up with an idea. So one of the things that we developed was giving founders a stipend. So we give everyone who joins us £2,000 a month. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's better than nothing.
Sure.
£2,000 a month just to cover, well, whatever they want to spend it on, really. So cover living fees, cover food, housing, whatever. And they have 3 months on that stipend to work out what they want to work on. So to find a co-founder, so you join with 100 other people, or 99 other people, and the majority of people find a co-founder within that pool, and we have a series of mechanisms and methodologies to help get people into teams.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that always surprises people about what we do is that it's not about getting people into teams. It's actually, easy to walk up to someone and say, hey, let's try working together.
Yeah.
The really hard bit is when you realize, you have that moment of realization of, shit, this actually isn't going to work, we shouldn't be working together. And then you have that really awkward social interaction of trying to break up that team.
And this is the question. So we have a question from somebody here. Conventional startup wisdom says that founders should know each other inside out before founding. Why does EF work?
I mean, that's a great question. The conventional wisdom is you do need to have known people for ever to be able to co-found a startup with them. And I did co-found with someone that I'd known for 2 years and then had a very good friendship with. But the trouble with that is it really reduces the pool of people that you can co-found with. And if those people aren't looking to co-found at exactly the same time as you and on the same idea and they have the right skill set, you're kind of screwed. There was no guarantee that when we started putting people together in these inorganic relationships that it would work. But I think a really interesting and useful analogy is online dating. I'm about to marry a man in 4 weeks that I met online 5 years ago. And that is normal now, although I was a bit embarrassed to tell my parents that we met online when I first took him home. But things have changed so much.
They know now?
Sorry?
They know now?
They know now. 5 years ago, it was embarrassing maybe to be online dating, whereas now it's like, why would you date in any other way if you want to meet everyone that's single, if you only want to meet people that are single and who are looking for a relationship or anything else now, then you would, why would you do that? The most efficient way to do that is online. And if you look at something like eHarmony, their stats are absolutely insane. So they have something like 10% of all US marriages are made through eHarmony, but their marriages are more likely to last the first year of marriage than organic marriages. So mechanisms that help people find individuals that they wouldn't usually interact with, but who share a common life goal. So either getting married, and eHarmony is very much directed at getting married, and EF isn't about kind of quick fling co-founder relationships. It's about the relationship that will help you build a globally important company, which could take 10 years. So it is like a marriage. So you can make this work, and I think what's really interesting is seeing we've built 120 plus teams, and teams don't get through EF and then break up because of co-founder issues. We've had 1 or 2 teams that have broken up because of that, but actually the number one issue why teams usually fail is because of co-founder issues. Yeah. But because we have this mechanism where we say, okay, in the early days, let's do feedback sessions, let's do open communication, because we need to work at this relationship. This is like marriage counseling, I suppose. You need to work at this relationship from day one. It means that you set up these sort of very honest and open relationships. Whereas if I've known you since kindergarten, then maybe I've actually got a bit of a chip on my shoulder because you always talk over me and you always win. And, I have all this stuff that I just can't talk to you about because we don't have that professional relationship. So I think you can create much stronger relationships artificially. And, hopefully my marriage will go well to this man I met online. And the teams that we have built through EF have shown that actually it does really, really work.
Let's talk about them. How big are the teams? Are there 3 people teams or more?
Well, this is the beauty of it. It has to be 2. Okay. So if you imagine the complexity of not only getting to know someone, but also coming up with an idea together, as soon as you add a third person into that relationship, it becomes exponentially more difficult. You increase the number of relationships, you increase the likelihood of disagreement over the idea, or even just misalignment over the idea. So our teams are always 2 people.
Okay, and you don't allow if 3 people want to come in together, they can't?
Well, we just take individuals. We have had people try teams of 3, teams of 4, and in fact, so for the last 3 years we've said no, and then this year we're like, okay, cool, let's try teams of 3 again, and it didn't work again and again.
Okay, now how much time does it normally take to bring those 2 people together, the right people, and then for them to start having an idea of what they want to do?
50% of people find their co-founder in 2 weeks. The other 50% have up to 8 weeks to find their co-founder, and typically they form around an idea. Now that idea will often change and develop and iterate, but it's reasonably rare that 2 people come together around an idea, they decide that idea doesn't work, and then they keep on working together. Because the key part of what we do is we help people break up and get out of bad teams, and we know what a bad team looks like.
Yeah.
And the big thing for us is if you are productive as a pair of co-founders, you should keep going. Even if you don't like each other, potentially. But if you are productive and you are each week setting goals and you are reaching those goals and you are learning and constantly learning and improving and iterating what you're doing, to us that is what a good early stage team looks like. And
you're mentioning goals. Are you setting those goals or they set themselves their own goals?
They set their own goals. I mean, we're not, this is not sort of a paternalistic...
Suggestions maybe, you know?
Yeah, so you are, at EF, you are running your startup and you provide a framework and kind of situation to make that work.
So what is the ideal output at the end of the 3rd month program?
So after 3 months, you should be in a team. At that point, you go through our investment committee where we invest 80K for 10%. You then have another 3 months to get ready for seed funding.
There's no demo day?
We do a demo day. So we have a demo day, and then we then help you for another 6 months to close that seed funding.
So do all of them come and present what they built in 3 months or not?
The majority do. So if you get through our investment committee, then you're kind of on the path to pitching at demo day. And our companies raise, on average, £1 million and raise from some of the kind of top investors, both in the UK and the US. About 50% of our companies now take some form of seed funding from either US super angels or early stage VCs.
And they have 3 months after that to do what, you say?
So we support the teams for 6 months post demo day. Fundraising is a tricky beast, and so much of it is about network that we will work with you until you close your seed round.
So you make introductions and...
Introductions, closing a seed round is a fine art, and I wish it was easier than it is, but so much of it is about who you know, so much of it is about how you manage those relationships, and you know, there's a bunch of tactical and strategic stuff that you need to do. It's not as simple as just going to people and asking for money. So
what are top tips? Because you know, investors, startups at this stage, they have this fear of not raising the funding, so they're desperate.
Yeah.
And on the other side, investors don't want to back desperate founders. Now, how do you advise startups to handle the fear of missing out for the investors and to manage them to close the deal on time before they run out of money?
You need to know when to raise. So you need to know when your runway ends, and you need to know what metrics you need to have to be able to raise, or what you need to have in place to be able to raise. And if you're super early stage, you may not have any metrics, but you need to have something, at least a really compelling story about why you're different. And you need to be able to communicate that story well. Do not begin fundraising until then. Now, VC associates, they are basically paid to have coffee with people. So I wouldn't go around having lots of coffee with different VC associates. That's a really, really good way for them to gather data on you and on your progress. Instead, I would wait until you're ready to go into active fundraising mode, which means all of your documents are ready, the company is in a position that means it can fundraise, and then you proactively go through that process and you manage it really carefully. Thinking about how much you're going to raise and making sure that you have stress tested that with mentors or advisors beforehand so that you can have a productive conversation with the people that you're looking to raise with, and also making sure that you've also tested your valuation as well, and have an idea of what valuation is realistic.
Okay. Do you also advise your startups to do something on AngelList, like digital platforms of fundraising, or not really?
A bit. I mean, ultimately, you're looking to try and create as much competition around your round as possible. So you want as many people interested in your company, and what that will often do is push up the amount of money that you can raise, and that ultimately does normally push up the valuation of your company as well. So you're trying to create a competitive environment, so the more interest you can generate around your round, the better, which is why accelerators have become so popular and so useful, and why they can justify taking equity, is because they can but they can help you structure your fundraising round so that you can get the best possible valuation, you can get the best possible amount of money raised.
Okay, so in your portfolio, there are companies which are valued at over $1 billion now, and you have some...
The whole portfolio is valued at over $1 billion.
Yes, and there are some companies which, like Magic Pony. How did this story come together? And it was one of the most successful AI exits of last year, right?
Yeah. So Magic Pony Technology, which is a terrible name for a very serious company.
Who does know Magic Pony here? Raise your hand. Okay, many.
So Magic Pony came through EF, our third cohort, so just when we were beginning to know what we were doing. And they were a really interesting kind of untypical EF forming story where it was two guys who'd been at Imperial. They're both at Imperial, they're both interested in startups, but they didn't meet at Imperial, they met at EF. One was doing a electronic engineering degree, a master's, and the other was doing a medical imaging PhD. And when they first joined EF, they both worked with different people on different ideas. And it was only around week 8 that they actually began working together on the idea that became Magic Pony. And they were looking at, initially, at a bunch of totally random ideas, but all using computer vision in various ways. And then ultimately the idea that they landed on was how can you improve video processing technology? So basically, how can you compress videos more effectively? They raised a very good seed round from Balderton and Octopus when they left EF at Demo Day. And then they were having customer conversations with Twitter that then led to their acquisition.
Nice. Well done.
So they went from joining EF to 18 months later being acquired for 150 million.
That was very fast. Congrats.
Very fast.
What is right now your biggest challenge?
Biggest challenge for EF. So we're growing very fast. So we're now 70 people. And so obviously, whereas this time last year, I think we're about 30 people. So from a founder perspective, managing that growth and both being able to hire very quickly, onboard people very quickly, and maintain the culture of the team is a constant kind of thing that I'm thinking about. And then the next big thing for us is, where are we going to go next? We opened our Berlin office at the beginning of the year, and we're looking at various other locations to open this year. But the big thing for us is scale. You know, we have product market fit, we know our product works, we know people want our product, we know how to find our customers. So now how do we just find as many customers as possible and make sure that our product is accessible to them as well?
You're mentioning two words. One is culture, the second is scale. What is your culture?
Our culture. Our culture is super ambitious, very externally competitive, not internally competitive. And one of our kind of cultural values is push yourself and others to greatness. And it's this idea that if you join EF as a member of our team, it's because we want to push you to be the best version of yourself. And we have a pretty young team. If you look at our first intern, or one of our first interns who joined us 5 years ago, straight out of uni, he now runs our Singapore office. Nice. And he's got a team of 22 people out there. So I suppose EF was always built on this belief that regardless of your experience, as long as you are super ambitious and very dedicated and hardworking, you can do amazing things. So we expect that from the team, and then we expect our team to support our founders that go through the program to do the same. Our other cultural value is to be a honey badger. So I don't know if you know a huge amount about honey badgers, but they are the smallest but most ferocious animal on the African plain. And they're just like these pure balls of muscle. And they proactively, they're only like this big, but they proactively seek out lions and go and like harass lions and go and bite them and stuff. And they can actually kill lions by running between their back legs and biting their balls off, apparently. I haven't seen it in person. And so what that means for our culture is, we don't encourage that in the office, but what that means for our culture is it doesn't matter if you're small, it doesn't matter if you're taking on some of the really, really big players on the African plain. What really matters is your attitude and knowing that you can be very smart about things, you can be very scrappy, you can be very tenacious, and you shouldn't be afraid to take on goals and targets that are much, much bigger than yourself. So we have this kind of phrase in the office, which is be a honey badger. Our honey badger mascot is called Stoffel.
Yes. Do you guys know the story of Stoffel? It's a honey badger in South Africa. Actually, a friend of mine who runs the company Good AI, he's this gaming company to pay for the AI company. He has about 3 million customers, and he is right now in South Africa. And he loves the Stoffel honey badger. Apparently, honey badger can take on an entire group of lions. He is not afraid.
There are videos of that on YouTube which are amazing because it looks like this honey badger is just being shredded, and then every time you think it's dead, it like jumps up and like grabs the lion's face.
And it's very intelligent. And my friend is building a artificial AI engine, and he's actually studying the honey badger about how he thinks because he can learn very fast.
Oh, wow.
The future of EF, are you going to be, like you are now, focused on any subject, or do you plan to, at some point, start focusing on some niches? Like Techstars is sometimes with Techstars, FinTech, and so on.
So we're pretty agnostic about what we invest in. We want to invest in what the best talent wants to create. So about 60% of our portfolio does use artificial intelligence in some way. But that's not because we're an AI investor. It's just because for the last couple of years, there's been a swathe of really exceptional AI talent coming out of British and European universities. But what we're beginning to see now coming through is a bunch of stuff around energy, battery technology, supercapacitors, a bunch of stuff around synthetic biology, around crypto and blockchain. So we're very much agnostic. We want to work with the world's best talent. And actually, I think from an investment perspective, the world's best talent knows about the most exciting trends way before the VCs do.
Sure.
So don't look to what the VCs are investing in. It's already too late. Look at what the most talented individuals are choosing to study, and then go and dig them out, and that's where you'll find them.
Mm-hmm. Where is EF today compared to where you want it to be?
Where is it today? So I think we're in a really good place. 2018 is looking super exciting for us. It's taken a long time to get the company to this place, as in we're 6.5 years old. But the most recent funding round we've done with Reed and with Greylock and Founders Fund and Mosaic and Lakestar means that we really can, over the next couple of years, turn this into a globally important company and not just a sort of European and Southeast Asian company. So there's a bunch of work that we need to do to make EF truly accessible to all of the world's most talented and ambitious people, while still retaining our kind of resolute focus on only working with the very best people.
Yeah. Now, looking back at your portfolio companies and the founders, what are the most common mistakes they keep doing when they start building teams together? Working on an idea.
Most common mistake. I think one of the things that's really hard when you're trying to come up with an idea to work on, and particularly when you're trying to come up with an idea in a slightly artificial environment, as in come up with an idea now, is it's very easy for people to discount what they know, their expertise and their skills. So we have a model that we call Edge. So we encourage everyone to work on their edge. And so one of the reasons we started this was we had a bunch of people that we were trying to get on the program come through, and we were doing coffees with them, and we were saying, do you have any ideas about what you're interested in working on? And they were typically kind of machine learning PhDs from UCL or Imperial, or the odd banker, and they all wanted to work on a dating app. And this is kind of 3 or 4 years ago, where that was like, the thing to create. And none of them would have been the best person in the world to start a dating app, but they discounted their experience because they were so used to being surrounded by other machine learning PhDs in their lab, or by other high-frequency traders, or whatever it may be, that they didn't realize that the skill set they had was valuable and special, and meant that they were more likely to have a unique and interesting insight. So when people come to EF, we help them think about, do you have a technical edge, or do you have a domain edge? So do you have either a technical skill that you can leverage, and that, particularly if you've done a PhD, for example, you're probably in the top 50, 20 people in the world that have that kind of expertise. And if so, you're totally crazy not to try and work on that, because that's a real competitive advantage. Or if you have a domain edge, so you've maybe been working in industry for 5, 10 years, for example, it's highly likely that you know things about that industry that would be very, very hard for an outside-in person to learn. And you have a competitive advantage in terms of the network and knowledge that you have. And building a startup is so hard in itself that you don't necessarily want to make that even harder by working in an industry that you don't understand. I think often people see startups as a great way to do a career change. So, I'm fed up with, working in whatever industry. I want to work on my passion project. And we see people often wanting to work on sports or music or arts-based stuff. Now, if you are, we had someone apply the other day who we were like, yep, you should work on a football-based product. But he'd been on like the under-21s national German football team. He had then been a coach for one of the top leagues in Germany for the last 5 years. He had then worked.
He's passionate about that.
He was a genuine expert. He wasn't just some guy that played five-a-side twice a week. So you should really, really think about what are you an expert in? Like, what have you spent your career becoming an expert in, either your academic career or your actual career? Because that is your edge. That's your personal competitive advantage. And I would strongly encourage you all to use it. There are a bunch of successful dating, food delivery, house sharing apps that already exist. Work out what's special about you.
What is your biggest passion in this sense? What industry makes you very excited?
What industry? We're very lucky that we're seeing a bunch of really interesting stuff coming through at the moment. I think around energy, so around either new kinds of battery technology or new kinds of wireless power transfer. And we've got a couple of startups in Singapore working on that. We've got a couple of startups in London at the moment working on different forms of synthetic biology, which is a new space for us, but one that is super exciting and is just getting to that tipping point where it's not going to be hundreds of millions of dollars to get it to market.
Yeah.
So we are very technology-led, often rather than market-led, and we're seeing a bunch of talent come through with those backgrounds.
Okay, now let's look at the questions from Slido, and then we also take 1 to 3 questions from the audience. So please let's get the microphone ready. The question which Anonymous wanted to know is, London is ridiculously expensive, competition for talent from big tech firms is huge, and then there's Brexit. Why should I establish my startup in London?
Why London? Great question. London is the de facto capital of startups in Europe. If you look at the quantity of seed funding available in London, it's 2 or 3 times what you can find in Berlin or Paris. In terms of startup expertise, there's a real critical mass of startups in the UK and startups that have grown. Now, why is that important for you if you're thinking about starting your company? Well, you're probably going to want to poach people, if you do well, from those startups, because those people will have the experience and skills that you need to be able to grow your startup. So there's a money reason, there's a talent reason, and then finally, London is a global capital in terms of bringing together government, industry, universities, and it's a kind of global city, and I don't think you can underestimate the benefits of that. Yes, there are cheaper places to be in Europe, but I think in terms of having access to the right resources, I think it just puts London head and shoulders above the rest.
Yeah, but sold, we are staying. We're not going anywhere. David Wicks wants to know, and question very interesting, finding the right talent is critical to growing a successful startup, as a demand is much greater than supply. What does EF do to help the startups recruit?
Great question. I mean, talent is just the biggest issue for every startup I know. If you're trying to grow, trying to hire effectively and quickly is really, really hard. And I'm sure if any of you, or for those of you who are running companies, this is probably the biggest thing you're thinking about. So we recruit 200 people a year in London. Like 80% of them are technologists. And how much effort and time goes into us recruiting those people. We have a team of 10 who work full-time on finding those people, converting those people, helping those people with visas, getting them to join the company. And we actively source people.
How do you do that?
I mean, it's a kind of basic talent technique around going and finding the people you want. The people who, if you have a role to fill, the people you want are probably already in an existing role. So we help our alumni companies. So if people don't make it on the program, their most common exit route is to go and join one of our alumni companies as an early employee.
Okay.
But ultimately, it's about understanding that your job as a founder, your number one job pretty much, is just to hire well. And if you hire well, kind of everything else sorts itself out. If you hire badly, you're kind of screwed. So knowing as a founder that the majority of your time probably will be spent on sourcing people, screening people, onboarding people, knowing that that is a big part of your job, I think is probably one of the hardest things for our founders once they've raised seed funding.
So we do this conference once a year, and Vinod Khosla, the founder of Sun Microsystems, he always says he spends most of his time recruiting for his portfolio companies. And he always insists on coming on stage and off stage through the audience because he wants to meet founders all the time. So you do the same, so you also meet founders and you recruit for your portfolio companies.
We do support them with recruiting. We don't actively recruit for them. We've got 120 portfolio companies. But because we have thousands of people each year that apply to EF, we do have a system that allows, if people, when they apply, opt in, we do have a system that allows our alumni to get access to that.
Okay. Next question. HC wants to know why C requires co-founders to work together on a significant project before applying. What problem do you think they anticipate, and how does EF overcome it?
Sorry, say again?
YC requires co-founders to work together on a significant project before applying. What problem do you think they anticipate, and how does EF overcome it? Is HC here? Please raise your hand. Can you please explain the question?
Oh, YC. Okay, yeah, got it.
Does it make sense?
I mean, YC is absolutely fantastic at what it does, but it is set up for teams. So if you are set up for working with teams, you really, really don't want teams to break up.
True.
EF is not set up for teams initially, it's set up for individuals. So actually, if you guys, we do get people who apply in pairs, but about 50% of them break up. And that's totally okay because we have a system and process that allows people to reform teams very quickly. So, I mean, I think, I don't know for YC, but I would assume it's because they cannot, because startup founder dispute is the number one cause of startup failure. They're probably trying to do whatever they can to make sure that doesn't happen because they don't have a system in place to cope with that, as in it's just a different model.
Okay. There's one question which I like here is, what is the one idea which you have incubated in EF in 6 years you are really proud of? Or you're the proudest of?
Oh, I can't say. I'm proud of them all, equally.
All of them. Cool. Now, any questions in person if you want to
by the way, the startup that Matt and I were going to do was a dating app.
Okay. Cool, so we have both of them down. Any questions you want to raise in person, please raise your hand. Okay, let's take Peter over here. Let's go with the lady first.
Please introduce yourself.
The lady first, yes.
Lady.
Please stand up and tell us who you are and ask away.
Hi, my name is Valentina Christensen. I currently head up marketing at a challenger bank, but I'm very interested in potentially starting a business at a later stage. And I think what you've said about the sort of technical background is very interesting, but the sort of also the storytelling element of it, because I think that is something that I see from a lot of the entrepreneurs that we lend to. They have difficulty in telling their story, and often that's a big differentiator in terms of actually securing the funding or securing the debt. So would you consider taking people who have a marketing or communications background over someone who's got a technical background?
So we do take non-technical people, but it comes back to this idea of edge. So do you have some area of expertise that you can bring in? So if you are coming to us with a non-technical background, we do probe more on idea. We want you to have at least a problem area that you want to work on. I think the thing technologists and communication is really interesting. We do a huge amount of work on comms, but I suppose one of the things that I believe very strongly is just because you're technical doesn't mean you can't be CEO. And actually some of the world's best CEOs are technical. So if you look at Gates and Zuckerberg and, I mean, the list is really long, but I think often technical talent is undervalued, particularly in Europe. But most of our best CEOs have technical backgrounds.
Okay, next question.
Hi, I'm Mukesh Advaryu. And my question is, what if someone has got, not only got an idea, but it has got, they've got a concrete implementation of that idea in terms of fully working product, and they are searching for some kind of funding. So how EF can work, help them to get that?
So we're probably not for you if you're at the point where you're looking for seed funding. We're very much pre-seed, pre-idea, pre-team, pre-everything. We just want you. So if it's just you and that's it. But if you're at the stage where you have a product and you're looking for funding, the first thing you need to do is make sure it's not just a product, it is a company. So you do have a commercial story around what you're doing, and you can articulate where that seed funding will get you in a commercial point of view and not just from a product point of view. So there's a bunch of accelerators that can help you once you are in a team and with an idea and you're working on something. But EF will be a bit early for you.
Okay, thank you. One more question. Raise your hand if you don't know anything.
Anyone?
Yes, over there at the back. Oh, Peter, just there.
I think I was technically second, so give it to someone else. Hi, I'm Dea with Innovate Finance, but I was curious about your experience with opening in other markets now and whether you find the interactions culturally or kind of the what are the differences that have you seen from your first cohorts in Singapore?
So I think the amazing thing about opening another office is it's actually, it was okay. It wasn't, I thought it was terrific, and it was the team has just done an amazing job. And from a cultural perspective, we sent 2 of our first employees out to Singapore, and it just means that you walk from the London office to the Singapore office, and it's kind of like walking across the yard in the biscuit factory where we are in London. The culture is very, very similar. I think and our Berlin office, we've sent not one of our first employees, but someone who was on our very first cohort, so who has kind of the EF culture sort of in their blood. The difficult bit becomes communication, particularly with time zones. So there's a kind of 2-hour overlap between the London workday and the Singapore workday. So making sure that there is a connection between the company at every level when you're considering time zones. And now we've got a third location, and we also have a small office in the US as well. It is a bit of a nightmare. But there's a bunch of kind of solved ways on how to fix it. It's just putting it all in place. So it's something that I'm spending a lot of my time working on at the moment, but it's a fun problem to fix.
Nice. Thank you, Dea. Now, my last question is around, it's a bit more personal. Who really inspires you? Talking about entrepreneurs, who are the world's best entrepreneurs in your mind?
I think when you say inspires, I actually read something about, not about entrepreneurship that really inspired me recently, about Scott's expedition to Antarctica as the second person that got to the South Pole. And there is a great book called The Worst Journey or The Hardest Journey on Earth. And it's basically about how he and his men got to the South Pole and how, I assume you all know the end of the story, which is they all died. Sorry if I've just ruined that for everyone. But it is a well-known historical thing. But it's a really interesting book on leadership, and particularly leadership during an endurance test. And building a startup is an endurance test. And it's under kind of slightly, it's under very, very difficult conditions where there's no guarantee that you will survive. And I think that there's a bunch of really interesting lessons that you can take from books about leadership that aren't directly about startups. So I would highly recommend reading it. It gave me a lot to think about.
Nice. And on this note, please join me in thanking Alice Bentinck from Entrepreneur First.
Thank you.
Now, before we finish, we have a few more things to say to you. One thing is, I would like to say thanks to all of our team members who made this happen. You can meet them in a minute. I also want to thank our sponsor and partner, Louis Silkin, who are a law firm. And Tim, do you want to come and say a few words on your colleagues is coming? Okay, it's just very quick explanation of what they're doing and how can they help you, because they're helping us as well. We're using them as a law firm. So in a nutshell, what do you do for startups?
So we help with your horrible legal requirements, basically. I do immigration law. You're talking about talent's one of the hardest things to do, particularly within the tech space. That talent is often not British and requires a visa, so I help with that and making sure you're compliant. I have my colleagues here. I've got Matt, who does tax. and Tim that does corporate law. So if you've got any questions that you'd like to bring to us, please come find us out.
Thank you. And you also help founders with the funding rounds and doing the paperwork and so on. Great. Now, this is our partner, Louis Silken. We're working with them for ourselves as well. Now we're going to be finishing and the networking starts. If there's any